The rope cut into her wrists long before the iron did. They dragged her at dawn, when the ground was still cold and the world hushed. No trial. No priest. No mother to hold her hand. Just two ranch hands reeking of sweat and whiskey, jerking her through the dust like she was livestock. Belle Rose didn't cry. Not then. Not when they forced her to her knees in the town square and hooked the manacles to the wagon wheel. She only looked forward, her eyes sharp as dry thorns. And when one of the men laughed and said she'd be married by sundown, she spat in the dirt like it tasted of him. The crowd didn't gather fast, but it gathered. Dusty boots shuffling. Shop doors creaking open. One by one the town came out to see the girl who said no. The sheriff stood off to the side, chewing a toothpick, arms folded. "Ain't my place," he muttered to the blacksmith beside him. Her pa gave consent. "Still," the blacksmith said quietly, "she's just a girl. She's 18. Grown enough. But that baron's older than the preacher. And meaner. Don't change the law none. The law." Belle could have laughed if it didn't hurt to breathe. The law never showed up when her mother got sick. Never came when the baron's riders took her family's cattle for loan interest. Never said a word when her father signed her name on that marriage contract just to clear his whiskey debts. Now here it was, clean-shaven and useless, flicking dust off its badge. The wagon creaked as the wind shifted, sun climbing high above the square. A dry, hot glare settled over the town like judgment. Belle shifted, chains rattling faintly. Her back was raw from where the rope had scraped her during the ride. Her lips cracked, bleeding a little at the edges. But her jaw stayed locked. She would not beg. The baron hadn't arrived yet. They said he'd come with a preacher and 3 witnesses. Make it legal. Show the town how a woman gets tamed. She'd be wrapped in white lace, limp and grateful, they said. They didn't know her. From across the street, Mrs. Mallory brought her hand to her mouth. "Poor child," she whispered. Her husband tugged her inside. "Ain't our business." A boy tried to bring Belle water. His mother slapped it out of his hands. "You help her, you bring trouble on all of us." The boy looked at Belle. She winked. No one else came close. It wasn't bravery that kept her spine straight. Not really. It was rage. A hollow, pulsing heat that filled the place where her hope used to live. She imagined how her mother might have sung softly, might have rubbed her hands, whispered prayers. But her mother was gone, put in the ground 3 winters ago beside the orchard. Her father, once a proud plowman, was now a bent man with liquor-stained breath who bartered away his daughter like she was a mule. She was never his to sell. The chains chafed. Her vision blurred in the heat. Her heartbeat slowed. And still she waited. Then came the sound of hoofs. Slow. Unhurried. Steady like a song with no words. Not the baron's procession, not with that rhythm. People turned. A man rode in, tall on a dun-colored horse. Dust clung to his coat. His hat shadowed his face. He dismounted without hurry, tying his horse to a rail outside the general store. Belle watched him with narrow eyes. He didn't look at her. He walked inside. Bought coffee and oats. "Colt McRae," someone whispered. "Thought he left for good. Must be needin' a new stallion. Lost his last one to snakebite." "Don't talk to him," warned a younger man. "He don't take kindly to questions." Colt exited the store with a small sack in one hand and a tin mug in the other. He sipped once. Then his eyes flicked toward Belle. Not long. Not boldly. But it was enough. Enough to make her lift her chin. Enough to keep her from crumpling. He walked past the square like it didn't exist. Like she didn't exist. But his step hesitated just slightly before the last porch board. And he left the mug behind on the bench where she could see it. Still steaming. She didn't drink. Not yet. But her throat ached for it. Time crawled. The baron's men arrived by midday, riding 2 wide-chested bay horses and grinning like this was a picnic. They carried lace. A preacher followed in a buggy, face unreadable. One of them pointed at Belle and laughed. "She'll look real fine in white." She didn't move. Didn't blink. They draped the dress over the wagon's edge, mocking. "We'll get her cleaned up." "Not too clean," another said. "He likes 'em a little wild." The townsfolk looked away. Only the sheriff stayed close. His hand twitched once near his holster, but didn't draw. And Colt McRae stood in the shadows between the saloon and the barber's, watching. His fingers tightened on his saddlebag. He hadn't meant to stay. He hadn't meant to care. But her stillness, that kind of stillness didn't come from meekness. It came from fire. Banked waiting. He remembered another girl once with fire like that. And how the world had tried to drown it. He turned. Started to walk. Belle looked up right at him. Not pleading. Just looking. Like she'd counted the people who turned away. And he was next. He hesitated. Then kept walking. She closed her eyes. The preacher stepped forward. The Baron's men pulled her up. Chain still on. One held up the dress, ready to force it over her head. She flinched. Then, crack. The sound of thunder, but there were no clouds. A rifle shot echoed off the brick walls. The chain between her wrists snapped, falling to the dirt like a broken promise. Gasp. Shouts. From the edge of the square, Colt stood, rifle leveled. I'll only say this once, he said, voice steady. Let her go. The Baron's men froze. The sheriff didn't move. Just muttered, God help us all. And Belle took one step forward. Hands bleeding, dress torn, eyes blazing. No one touched her. Not yet. Not while Colt McCrae was aiming down iron sights with the look of a man who'd buried too many regrets. But the Baron wasn't a man who backed down easy. And the chains were only the beginning. The rifle lowered, but Colt McCrae's shoulders stayed tight, like the shot was still ringing in him. He didn't speak to the girl. Didn't step closer. Just nodded once, slow and deliberate, and backed into the alley, disappearing between the brick shadows like a man walking into his own grave. Belle didn't follow. Not yet. Her hands trembled, wrists bruised and red where the chain links had torn skin. For a long second, the whole square held its breath. Then someone shouted for the sheriff. Then another for the Baron. By the time the men turned to find Colt, he was already gone. Belle wasn't. They left her unchained but not unwatched. The Baron's men grumbled, spit into the dust and promised she wouldn't get far. One stayed posted on the porch of the dry goods store. Another leaned against a post, watching her like a hawk watching a wounded rabbit. The preacher had retreated quietly into his buggy. He wouldn't be marrying anyone today. The wedding was postponed. But not cancelled. You'll wear that dress tomorrow, one of the men muttered to her, or you'll wear worse. Belle didn't answer. She sat on the wagon's edge, hands limp in her lap, the iron chain still coiled at her feet like a dead snake. Her eyes didn't scan for escape routes or shadows. They watched the road, the one that led west. The one he'd taken. Colt McCrae hadn't gone far. He didn't run. That wasn't in him. He rode slow, letting the dust hide him. Half a mile out, he stopped beneath the dry bones of an old cottonwood tree and waited. The town would settle. They always did. Fire could burn in their eyes one minute and freeze in their hearts the next. He'd seen it before. When his wife was taken in the raid, people had whispered sympathy, but no one rode with him to get her back. He buried her alone. No one remembered her name now. But Colt did. He remembered everything, especially what it meant to be left to suffer while good men stayed silent. He unsaddled his horse, led it to a patch of shade, and stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the horizon like it might speak sense to him. He hadn't meant to get involved. He came for a horse. Maybe coffee. Certainly not a girl with a fire behind her eyes and scars too fresh to heal. But something in her stillness had spoken. Not in words. In defiance. The way she didn't plead. Didn't weep. Like she'd rather burn than bow. He admired that. Hell, he understood it. He poured water from his canteen into a tin bowl and watched the horse drink. His own thirst knotted in his throat, but he didn't touch the rest. He was listening now, listening to the wind for riders, to the stillness for movement. Waiting for something to tell him what the hell to do next. Back in town, Belle was no longer chained, but her prison held. Eyes followed her. Whispers buzzed. No one dared help her now, not with Colt McCrae marked as an outlaw. She'd brought trouble. That's what they'd say. Not the Baron. Not the father who traded her. She hadn't expected a rescue. Certainly not from a stranger. And yet, when that rifle cracked the sky open and her chains dropped, some part of her had exhaled like it remembered how. But now what? Evening was falling. The light turned gold. The preacher left. The men guarding her grew restless. Eventually they fell asleep. She didn't. And just before midnight, a soft shuffle on the porch caught her ear. A shape moved through the shadows. She tensed. But a flask was set down near her boot, and then the figure vanished again. She sniffed. Not whiskey. Water. Her throat burned as she sipped. In the dark, Colt stood 100 yards out, watching the girl drink. He didn't know her name. Didn't need to. The way she held herself said enough. He should ride on. Leave before dawn. Forget the whole damn thing. But the wind wouldn't stop pulling at him. Not tonight. At sunrise, Belle stood. Her legs weak, her muscles stiff, but she walked, slow and measured, toward the edge of town. She carried nothing. wore nothing but the same torn dress and boots scuffed to hell. The Baron's men didn't see her leave. They were drunk on each other's snores. And when the sun rose clean over the horizon, Colt was already waiting. She didn't flinch when he stepped from behind the rocks. "You're early," he said. "You left your mug," she answered. Pause. Then she handed it to him. It was clean. He didn't smile. But he nodded. They didn't say more. Just walked together toward the bluff trail. He didn't ask her why she came. She didn't ask where they were going. But there was a quiet understanding that passed between them like smoke between fingers. Colt led the way, letting his horse trail behind, reins loose. Belle kept pace. He noticed she limped slightly, favoring her left leg, but said nothing. She wouldn't want pity. She'd had enough of that. By noon, they reached a ridge overlooking a dried-up riverbed. Below, scrub brush, sage, and silence. "Camp here," he said. She sat. He built a fire. For the first time she spoke more than a sentence. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "I could be trouble." "You are." "Then why help?" He poked the fire, avoiding her gaze. "Sometimes you see a thing that ain't right. And if you walk away, it follows you." She didn't respond right away. The fire cracked. A hawk circled overhead. Then she said, "My name's Belle." He finally looked at her. Really looked. "Colt," he said. She smiled. A flicker. But it stayed. Later, as the stars blinked above the canyon walls and the fire dwindled to embers, Belle lay curled beneath a horse blanket, her head turned toward the coals. Colt sat nearby, back to a rock, rifle across his knees. She whispered, "They'll come." "I know. You could still leave." He shook his head. "I don't run." She exhaled slow. "Then I guess I won't either." The wind stirred the embers. The horse snorted. Night pressed close. Neither of them slept easy. But neither slept alone. And somewhere, far behind them, hoofbeats were beginning to gather. The Baron wasn't done. Not yet. The fire had burned down to its last breath when Colt woke. Not from noise, no owl's cry, no snapping branch, but from a feeling. A stirring in the dark that made the hairs rise on his arms. He sat up slowly, rifle already in hand. Across the fire, Belle was asleep, curled beneath her blanket like a question unanswered. Her chest rose steady. Her hair, unbrushed and wild, was stuck to her cheek with sweat. A girl who had been hunted. Not a woman tamed. Colt stood listening. The canyon held its breath. Then he heard it, faint, far off. A hoofbeat swallowed in the dust. Not one horse. Several. Riders. He touched Belle's shoulder. Her eyes opened instantly, sharp as flint. No confusion. Just readiness. "They're coming?" she asked. "Yeah." She pulled the blanket off, swinging her legs around. "How many?" "Can't say yet." She stood, tugging her shawl tighter over her dress, still the same torn one from town. Colt watched her steady herself. She didn't tremble. Didn't look for comfort. Just adjusted her boots, fastened a loose braid behind her neck and said, "Let's move." They had planned for this. Not with maps or speeches, but with small things. A shared glance when he showed her the second trail, a pause when he handed her his extra canteen. The way he kept his rifle close even while drinking coffee. The way she never asked to stay. They weren't naive. Just quiet. Colt packed the camp quickly, boots crunching over gravel. Belle helped without asking, her hands calloused from a life of labor. She'd never had a wedding. Never wanted one. But she moved now with the grace of someone marrying herself to fate. When they rode out, it was moonless. Only the stars showed the path, faint and shivering above the bluff ridge. The canyon below, black as spilled ink. Colt led them through narrow switchbacks, always listening, scanning. His horse knew the terrain better than any man. Belle rode behind, bareback on his old mule, the only other animal he'd trust not to make a sound. They moved fast but silent. Breathless. Then a sound broke the quiet, distant shouting. The Baron's men had found the riverbed camp. And they were angry. Colt turned back once, his voice low. "There's an old cabin ahead. From the war. Will it hold? Long enough to stand or die in?" Belle nodded. They reached it just before the shouting reached them. A forgotten shack built into the stone wall, half collapsed, door hanging on a rusted hinge. But its back wall faced the cliff. No escape. Colt tethered the horse and mule in the shadows and handed Belle a revolver. She took it with a sharp nod, checking the chamber like someone who'd held a gun before. He didn't ask where she'd learned. Inside, the air smelled of mold and mice. But it was dark. Dry. Concealed. They waited. The minutes stretched, thick with tension. Belle knelt near the door, watching a crack in the wood. Colt crouched behind the table, rifle balanced, breath even. He didn't tell her to stay down. He didn't shield her. He treated her like someone who deserved to fight. And that, more than anything, undid her. The first rider appeared just past the boulder, a shadow against shadows. Then another. 4. No, 5. Colt counted quickly, eyes narrowing. They were fanning out, torches high. Then a voice called out. Colt McCrae. You're harboring stolen property. Belle flinched. Property. The man's voice oozed arrogance. It was James Waverly, the Baron himself. Fat from greed, rotten with entitlement. She knew his voice. Knew the way he sounded when making promises no girl should ever hear. Send her out, Waverly barked. And we'll forget your name. Colt didn't move. Belle's fingers curled around the revolver. Silence stretched. Then Colt stood and opened the door. Belle tensed, stepping forward, but he raised a hand, calm. Moonlight framed him as he walked out slowly, rifle still held, but lowered. The men raised their guns. He didn't blink. You're trespassing. This land don't belong to you. It don't belong to you either. Waverly's lip curled. That girl is mine by law. No, Colt said, his voice even. She's free. She's a contract. She's a person. Waverly laughed. A whore's daughter with a crippled farm and a drunk for a father. Colt didn't flinch. Still more human than you. That did it. One of the riders fired. Colt dropped. Belle screamed, once sharp, but Colt rolled behind the log pile, returning fire in a flash. The bullet clipped the rider's shoulder. He yelped, falling. Chaos. Gunfire cracked the night apart. Belle ducked, then rose, firing clean at the second man, aiming at Colt. Her bullet struck wood, but the warning was enough. Colt got back to his knees, fired twice more. Another man dropped his rifle and ran. Belle moved like fire now, eyes wild, focused, not panicked. She reloaded with shaking hands but didn't pause. Colt shot again and again until only 2 riders remained, Waverly and a trembling younger man. Still think she's yours? Colt shouted. Waverly snarled. She'll always be mine. Belle stepped into the open. You're wrong, she said, voice like flint. I was never yours. You only owned my silence. And then she fired. Waverly's hat flew off. He fell backward, bleeding from the shoulder. The last man dropped his gun and rode hard into the dark. Silence returned. A long, aching silence. Colt stood slowly. Belle walked to him. His shirt was torn, a graze on his ribs. Blood, but nothing fatal. She touched his arm. You all right? She whispered. He nodded. Then she swayed. He caught her before she hit the ground, easing her down beside the fire pit. Her body shook, not from pain but from release. The weight of 100 days breaking all at once. Colt sat beside her, breathing hard. The fire was out. The dead didn't move. The wind began to rise. I thought you were gone, she whispered. When they fired, I thought. He touched her hand. You didn't run. She smiled barely. You either. They sat in the doorway until morning bled pale across the ridge. No vows. No declarations. Just silence shared. And the faint scent of gunpowder clinging to freedom. They didn't leave the bluff for 2 days. The air still smelled of gunpowder and pine sap, and the dead men on the slope below had been dragged to a hollow by Colt and buried without ceremony. The Baron wasn't among them. He'd limped off, half dead but not buried. That meant trouble would come back sooner or later. But for now the world held still. Belle sat on the porch of the old cabin, legs tucked beneath her, sipping weak coffee from Colt's dented tin mug. Her wrists were healing, though the skin was still purple and angry where the iron had bitten. Her eyes had quieted. Not soft, just settled. Like the wind that followed a wildfire. Colt leaned against the rail beside her, sharpening his knife. He'd said maybe 3 words all morning. She hadn't minded. There was a fire line between them. Not one drawn in ash or sand, but something invisible and alive, stretching tight. Both knew where it began. Neither dared to cross it. I should leave soon, she said finally. Colt didn't look at her. You could. She nodded. I can't stay here forever. You can stay as long as you want. I don't want to be someone's burden. That made him pause. He set the knife down, looked at her, not hard, just long enough for the silence to mean something. You're not. She didn't answer. Instead, she rose, walking barefoot into the clearing behind the cabin, arms folded across her chest. Morning sun caught in her hair. He watched her from the shade, something turning behind his ribs like a wheel stuck in wet earth. When she came back, her face was unreadable. I used to think surviving was enough, she said. But now I'm not so sure. Colt nodded slowly. Surviving's what you do when you've got no say. Living's different. Have you done much of it? Living? His eyes flicked to the sky. Not lately. She sat again, closer this time, knees nearly brushing his. I keep thinking, she said, voice lower now, about the way you looked when you pulled that trigger. Like you'd done it before. Like you didn't even hesitate. I didn't. Why? He hesitated. Because they were going to take you. And I've watched that happen before. Once. She studied him. She was my wife, he added after a long breath. 4 years ago. Raiders came through our valley. Took livestock. Took women too. I went after her. Brought her back, but she was already gone. Inside. I held her hand for 6 weeks and she never said another word. Then she stopped breathing. Bell didn't speak. Didn't move. He continued, voice tight. I didn't protect her. Not fast enough. Not well enough. You. He stopped. She turned to him, voice steadier than he expected. You think I'm her second chance? No. I think I'm mine. That made her exhale, eyes burning. I don't want to be saved, she said. Good, he said gently. I don't want to be a savior. Their eyes locked. For once, no fireline. Just shared heat. She looked down. You ever been touched without pain? He blinked. I don't remember. She reached for his hand. Not quickly. Not with hunger. Just, honestly. Her fingers brushed his. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It wasn't innocent either. It was something in between, something carved from scars and slow awakenings. Do you want me to leave? She asked. No. She nodded. Then don't make me run. I wouldn't. A bird called in the trees above. The sun lifted higher, burning the night away. Later that afternoon they patched the cabin's roof together. She climbed without fear. He passed her nails and boards. They didn't speak much, but the silences were full now. Not empty. Just full of breathing and thought. As dusk settled, she cooked beans and rabbit in a pot over the fire. He watched her. She didn't ask if he liked it, just handed him a bowl. He ate it slow, grateful. Afterward, she reached for the knife, cleaned it, then handed it back. You trusted me with this, she said. He shrugged. Didn't see you as the sort to stab me. Maybe I should have. But you didn't. She smiled. That night, as wind rustled the pines and stars spread wide above them, Belle sat beside him again, closer than before. Her shoulder touched his. Do you believe in fate? She asked. No. She nodded. Me neither. Another silence. But I believe in choices, he said finally. She turned toward him. So do I. He looked at her hands, the way they rested in her lap now, no longer clenched. The bruises had begun to fade. But the strength had not. Tomorrow, he said, we can head north. There's a place where no one's looking for you. Good land. Clean water. And you? I'll go where you do. That stopped her. Then slowly she smiled. You're terrible at small talk. Never learned. Good. The fire crackled low. And for the first time Belle leaned into him, not to hide, not to seek warmth. Just to rest. He didn't move. The fireline was gone now. Burned through, not with violence but with understanding. And behind the trees, beyond the ridge, someone was still watching. The Baron hadn't forgotten. But neither had they. That first light, the sky over Willow Bluff cracked open like a shell. The horizon smoldered with hues of rust and gold, a thin veil of mist crawling through the gullies below, curling around the rocks like breath from something ancient. Colt McCrae stood near the edge, boot heels pressed into loose gravel, his rifle resting across his chest, gaze cast toward the trail winding up from the southern pass. He didn't need a spyglass to know they were coming. The birds had gone silent. Even the wind, usually restless at this time of morning, seemed to hush. He felt it in the earth, something heavy and sure moving toward them. Behind him, the old shack had been reinforced with rough timber, the cracks stuffed with moss and brush. It wasn't a fortress, but it would buy time. Enough, maybe. Belle stood in the doorway, her dress now stitched and cinched with Colt's leather belt. Her hair was braided back, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, a revolver on one hip, a knife tucked into her boot. No longer the girl in chains. She had not simply survived. She had chosen to rise. Colt turned slightly. You ready? Belle didn't blink. I've been ready since he put the rope in my father's hand. He nodded once, then handed her a second rifle. She took it without hesitation. They had practiced loading it. Her hands were steady now. She knew how to brace the recoil. They waited. By the time the first rider appeared, The sun had lifted enough to paint the world in blood-orange light. For shadows stretched along the trail, horses kicking dust. Waverly was in the middle. Bandaged, still proud, wearing a tailored coat that didn't hide the sling over his shoulder. He hadn't come to marry a bride. He'd come to take back what defied him. Belle stepped forward, out onto the bluff's flat, her feet brushing loose rock, hair pulled back in a single stubborn knot. Colt stood just beside her, both rifles raised but not aimed. Not yet. Waverly pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted. The others followed. Colt recognized one, Denton Shaw, the hired gun from Santa Fe. A man paid to shoot fast and talk slower. Trouble. Waverly spread his arms. You think a bluff buys you justice? No, Colt said. But it buys us high ground. Waverly chuckled. This ain't a war, McCrae. It's a debt collection. Belle stepped forward. You've no contract over me. Your father signed. He's dead. That gave Waverly pause. Then it passes to his estate. I'm not livestock. You're a girl who was spoken for. And I always collect. Colt's voice cut in low and clear. Not today. Waverly's grin turned bitter. You think she's yours now? Is that it? You think saving her earns you the right? Belle laughed then. Not soft. Not amused. Just a short, bitter breath. He didn't take me, she said. He stood beside me. That's the part you'll never understand. Waverly's eyes narrowed. Last chance, Colt said. Turn around. Denton Shaw raised his rifle. And what if we don't? Colt stepped left. Then we see who walks away. Silence. Then, crack. A gunshot split the morning. Belle fired first. Denton's shoulder spun back, his gun falling from his hand. Another rider dropped to a knee, blood streaking his thigh. Colt moved quick, calculated. Each bullet had a name. None wasted. The bluff echoed with noise, shouts, hooves scrambling, metal clashing rock. Waverly dove behind a boulder, yelling orders. But his men were already breaking. One took off down the ridge, too green to bleed for another man's ego. Colt advanced, stepping smooth between brush and stone. Belle reloaded. Fast. Cling. She knelt behind the shack, covering the trail. Another rider tried circling wide. She shot him clean through the shoulder before he cleared the draw. It didn't take long. When the last echo faded, only 2 men were left standing. Colt lowered his rifle and walked toward the boulder. Come out, Waverly. The Baron crawled out slowly, bleeding from a fresh graze on his temple, dirt in his mouth. His coat was torn. His right boot soaked dark. He sneered. Kill me then. No. Waverly laughed, bitter. You think leaving me alive makes you a better man? No, Colt said. It makes you the story. Waverly blinked. Colt stepped back. When word spreads that you rode 5 men into a bluff and got beat by a rancher and a girl in boots, folks'll stop fearing you. That's worse than dying. You'll be smaller after this. And you'll stay that way. Waverly cursed, staggering to his feet. Belle stepped forward, eyes hard. Don't come near me again. I'll ruin you, he spat. I'll burn your name. You already did, she said. And I lived. She handed Colt the second rifle and turned her back to Waverly. That was the end. He didn't follow. By noon, the dust of their fight had blown away. Waverly limped off with one rider dragging the wounded behind him. No threat now. Just noise in the distance. Colt and Belle stood side by side at the edge of the bluff, watching the horizon as if it might rewrite everything. I expected more blood, she said quietly. Same. You think he'll come back? Colt shook his head. He's not built for failure. He'll bury this. She was quiet a moment, then said, I want to bury it too. Start where? With a name. My own name. Not my father's. Not his. Colt waited. I was born Belle Rose Carter. But I think I'll just be Belle Rose now. He nodded. Belle Rose, he said, slow like it was a prayer. She turned to him, something soft on her face now, something tired and real. You're not what I thought you were. No. I thought men like you were stories. He smiled barely. Same goes for you. She laughed. Then after a beat said, What happens now? He looked out at the wild stretch of land beyond. The open plain. The hills that rolled toward somewhere better. Now, he said, we make something new. And if it doesn't work, then we try again. She nodded. I can live with that. They didn't kiss. There was no need for it yet. But when they turned from the bluff, walking down the path together, their shoulders touched. Just enough. The fire line was behind them. Ashes cooled. And ahead, whatever came next, was something they'd choose. Together. The narrator's voice would say it simply. Some chains are made of iron, others of silence. But the rarest kind are broken not by force, but by standing still beside someone when the storm comes. That's what he did for her. And what she learned to do for herself. That's why when the wind whistles through Willow Bluff, it don't speak of the Baron. It speaks of a girl who said no, and a man who listened. And it ends there. But it doesn't feel like the end. The wind carried dust like whispered prayers through the auction yard, curling around boots and broken boards, threading through the slats of the old corral where a black mare shifted restlessly. The air was dry, painted gold by a late afternoon sun that filtered through cottonwood branches overhead. Folks came here for trade, not talk. And they traded hard, livestock, tools, names, sometimes futures. James Boone stepped through the gate, his coat hanging heavy on shoulders too familiar with loss. He had the look of a man who'd been carved out of grief, all sharp lines and softened eyes. The townsfolk knew him, though they no longer asked how he was. A man widowed young with nothing but a dead field and a rusted plow earned his silence. Still he came for the mare. He had coin in his pocket and need in his bones. The farm wouldn't wait for sorrow. A boy announced the next round. The mare whinnied, the crowd shifted. James stood still, eyes scanning the pens with quiet purpose, not a flicker of urgency in him. The auctioneer, a thick-bellied man in a frayed bowler hat, lifted a cane and struck it once on the stand. Next, not a horse, he grinned, yellow teeth flashing. But she carries just the same. The laughter that followed felt wrong before the girl was even let out. From the side of the stable came a girl no older than 20. Barefoot, with a torn hem and a dark shawl clutched over her shoulders, she stepped out as if walking through fire. Her eyes were too wide, face too pale, and her stomach too round beneath the shawl to be hidden. The murmur spread like spilled oil, men shifting, women whispering, boots scraping dry earth. "Name's Mercy," the auctioneer said, tipping his hat like it was some joke. "Her pa says he's done with her, and she's got no home but a debt to clear. He's offering her up, one time only." From behind the girl, a man slouched against a post, Gideon Talbot. Red-faced and slick with sweat, he waved a hand like he was selling a mule. "Ain't nobody forced her here," he muttered. "Girl's been trouble since the cradle. Belly full of bastard and not a penny to feed it." No one spoke. The town had seen cruelty, but this was something sourer. Mercy's eyes met no one's. She stared at the ground like it might open and swallow her. James didn't move. His breath was shallow. The mare forgotten. "Who's got a home needs tend in?" the auctioneer called, trying to lace levity through shame. "She's strong, mostly quiet. Good cook. Can sew." No hands rose. Mercy didn't cry. That was the strangest part. She just stood there, fingers trembling, face still. A storm with no thunder. Only when a woman near the front clucked her tongue and turned away did Mercy's throat twitch, barely. James stepped forward. He didn't speak. Just walked, bootsteps slow across the brittle dirt. The crowd shifted to let him pass, curiosity muting judgment for a beat. He stood before Gideon, pulled the coin pouch from his coat and dropped it in the man's open palm. Gideon blinked. "That ain't what I asked." "You offered," James said. Voice low, solid. "I paid." The silence cracked. Mercy lifted her gaze for the first time. Her eyes landed on James like she couldn't quite see him. Not with clarity. Not with trust. But she didn't flinch when he turned to her. He didn't offer his hand. Didn't ask her name. Just nodded once like a promise made beneath the noise. Then he turned and walked away, slow and certain, the wind catching the edge of his coat. Mercy followed. There was no cheer. No applause. Only the rustling hush of a crowd unsure what they'd just witnessed. A transaction, yes. But not one they understood. Behind them, the auctioneer cleared his throat and tried to move on. The mare neighed again, but even she seemed quieter now. Martha Crane stood near the back, arms crossed over her apron. She'd seen a lot in Hollow Creek. Seen men drink themselves to death and women forgive too much. But what she'd seen in James Boone's silence unnerved her. Not cruelty. Not pity. Something else. Something slow and old and buried too deep to name. As James and Mercy climbed into the creaking wagon, a voice called out, "Boone, what you gonna do with her?" He didn't turn. Didn't answer. But Mercy sat beside him, shoulders curled like a leaf around its own stem. And when they rolled out of town, no one said a word. But every eye followed them as if watching a ghost pass through their world, gentle and unsettling. On the trail that wound through prairie grass turned amber by the dusk, Mercy finally spoke. "You don't even know me." James kept his eyes ahead. The reins loose in his hands. "I don't reckon I need to," he said. But you needed leaving less than you needed talking. She swallowed, the knot in her throat harder than bread crusts and shame. The sun bled into the hills, long shadows falling across the road. They rode in silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid, grief, mercy, hunger, hope, and something like warmth hidden just under the skin of the evening. And by the time they made camp that night beside a crooked cottonwood, with the stars watching quiet from above, James handed her his coat without a word. She didn't thank him. But she didn't give it back either. In the distance, a lone coyote howled. But inside that small circle of dirt and silence, two souls who'd been counted out by the world sat near each other, unmarried, unspoken, unclaimed, but no longer alone. And that, some would say later, was where the real trade happened. Not in coin, not in flesh, but in the quiet choosing of another's burden. And the long road that followed, the road out of Hollow Creek, stretched long and unspoken, carved through fields gone brittle with drought. Wagon wheels moaned across dry earth, a sound that filled the silence between two strangers too broken to speak and too stubborn to weep. James Boone sat at the reins, his posture steady but heavy, as if grief had weight and he carried it in his spine. Mercy Talbot sat beside him, her hands folded beneath the coat he'd given her, the one that smelled faintly of pine and leather and smoke. Her eyes didn't leave the horizon, but she wasn't looking forward. She was listening to something inside herself, a sound like glass cracking, slow and endless. They rode for hours without words, the wind flicking Mercy's shawl like it was impatient for something to be said. But nothing came. Not until the sun fell behind the ridgeline and the sky bruised purple. James turned off the trail near a shallow creek bed shaded by cottonwoods. He pulled the wagon to a halt and climbed down wordless. She didn't ask where they were. She didn't ask if this was home. Instead, she waited for instruction that didn't come. He unhooked the mare, still no name, still no affection, and led her to water. Mercy shifted in the seat, her belly heavy against her thighs, her back sore from hours of stillness. Her boots, borrowed from the wagon bed, were too wide, but she wore them anyway. Barefoot days were behind her now, she told herself. Whatever else this was. James returned and handed her a tin cup of creek water. Cool, clear. She nodded, accepting it without gratitude but not without recognition. I ain't askin' you to explain nothin', he said finally. I wouldn't know how, she replied. That was all for a while. He built a fire in a ring of stones like he'd done it 100 nights alone. Mercy watched the flames rise, low and deliberate. The kind of fire that didn't waste heat or light. Why'd you do it? She asked softly, not looking at him. By me. James sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a prayer not spoken aloud. You looked like someone worth saving, he said. And like someone no one else would. She flinched at that, at how close it was to truth. My father says I bring trouble. Your father's a drunk who sells what he should protect, James answered, not unkindly. That ain't gospel. Mercy pressed a palm to her stomach, where the child inside shifted as if sensing judgment nearby. I don't even know your name, she said. James Boone. I'm Mercy. You probably heard. I did. More silence. But softer now. She ate the hard biscuits he handed her and said nothing when he laid out a blanket a few paces from hers. The air cooled quick once the sun slipped down, and the stars arrived without fanfare, quiet and endless above them. That night, Mercy did not sleep. Neither did James. He watched the trees. She watched the dark. And somewhere in between, the fire crackled, and something not quite safety but close to it began to take root. By morning, the frost had kissed the edge of the blanket. James rose early and gathered kindling with slow hands. When he turned to check on her, he found her sitting upright, braid undone, eyes red. You gonna take me back to your farm? She asked. James nodded. It ain't much. Got a roof. Well, land that used to grow corn. You live alone? Since the burying. Yeah. Mercy didn't ask who was buried. She already knew. As they rode on, she noticed things she hadn't before, how he clicked his tongue low when the wagon shifted, how his shoulders tightened before every turn, how he glanced at her when she winced over a bump, but never asked if she was hurting. He didn't intrude. But he noticed. That evening it rained. Thin, cold droplets that felt like apology. They rode through it until James stopped beneath a rocky overhang and covered the wagon with an old tarp he pulled from beneath the bench. Mercy sat huddled, arms wrapped tight, teeth chattering. She hadn't thought she'd be this cold again. Thought shame burned hotter than weather. James hesitated before handing her the coat again. She looked at it. Then him. Then back at the coat. You give this every time I look like I'm breaking? No, he said. Just when you shouldn't have to. She took it this time without the silence. Later, as rain tapped gentle on the tarp, she whispered, I didn't ask to be with child. I know. But I ain't gonna leave it behind neither. James nodded in the dim, fireless dark. That's why you're worth it. She blinked, slow, unsure if he meant the child or her. Or both. The next day brought sun again and the road flattened. They passed a field of sunflowers gone dry and bent, petals clinging stubbornly, seed heads heavy like bowed heads in prayer. It was there, amidst that faded gold, that Mercy said, I tried to run once. Before he sold me. James didn't press her. I thought I'd make it to Fort Daniel. But I didn't even get past the river. He caught me. Took my shoes. Said next time I'd think twice. A quiet fell. James kept the wagon moving, but the reins in his hand twisted slightly. No one should be bought, he said. But some deserve to be chosen. She turned to him, startled by the way he said it. Like he'd been waiting a long time to believe it himself. At the edge of a tall ridge, his land came into view. A crooked barn, a small cabin, a well with a tilted beam. No fences, just grass and open air. That it? She asked. He nodded. Mercy looked at it like a stranger might look at a church door, not sure if she was welcome or damned. But she followed him when he stepped down, boots landing in dirt that smelled of clay and memory. He didn't carry her bags. Didn't open the door for her. Just walked ahead and lit the lantern near the porch. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, dust, and something older. She entered like a ghost. Slow, unsure where to rest her hands. There were no pictures. No keepsakes. Just a table, 2 chairs, a stove, and a single quilt folded neat on the cot. This your whole place? It is. Where'll I sleep? You'll have the bed. I'll take the bench. I ain't a guest, she said. You're not a servant either. She looked around. The quiet was louder than the wind outside. You didn't buy me, she whispered. No, James said. I took you out of something rotten. That's different. And now we make room. Mercy's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Instead she nodded. What? And that night, while the wind pressed against the walls and the old boards creaked like bones in sleep, she rested beneath his coat and did not dream of being owned or traded or escaped. She dreamt of sunflowers, bent but standing. And James, he sat by the window, eyes watching the moon, listening for the sound of peace returning. It hadn't come yet. But it would. They were on the road back. And it was longer than he'd thought, but not too long to walk with someone beside you. The wagon rolled into Hollow Creek at a hush before noon, its iron wheels dragging through a street half-dried from last night's rain. Dust clung to the underside like regret, and the townsfolk turned slow to stare, not with welcome, but with that quiet breed of curiosity that settles thick over a place too small to hide new stories. Mercy Talbot sat upright on the bench beside James, her borrowed boots scuffed and her shawl pulled tighter over the swell of her stomach. She didn't fidget. She didn't smile. Her gaze met no one's, but her spine held straight as a fence post. A girl taught young to endure does not flinch when she's being watched. She just learns not to blink. James tipped his hat to the grocer and the blacksmith, neither of whom tipped back. The butcher's boy whispered something sharp, and his mother tugged him away by the ear, her face turned hard. Women noticed Mercy first. Men noticed James after. They say he bought her. From her own kin. With child already? Imagine that. The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Words in Hollow Creek traveled better than telegraphs. Low, swift, and always trimmed sharp. James didn't respond. He drove the wagon up to the edge of town where a squat white house with ivy crawling up one side stood like an old woman watching the world go wrong. The sign read Cranebrook Boarding in faded green paint. Martha Crane met them on the porch with flour still on her hands and suspicion in her eyes. She was round and severe and known to take in strays, dogs, men, or ideas, but only if they knew their place. You're late, Boone, she said. And you didn't mention bringing company. James helped Mercy down with a hand under her elbow. Didn't know I was. Martha looked Mercy over with the precision of a tailor and the tact of a butcher. She his. I'm my own, Mercy said before James could speak. Martha's brows rose like shutters lifting in a storm. Then, almost grudgingly, she nodded. You'll take the room out back. No questions asked, but plenty heard. That fair? Mercy nodded. More than I'm used to. The room was clean but plain, with lace curtains and a bed stiff with starch. There was a small window that looked toward the hills, and a basin of water that smelled faintly of lavender soap. Mercy sat on the edge of the bed and took a long breath that almost made it to the bottom of her lungs. James didn't follow her in. He left her there, door half closed, and returned to his wagon like a man who didn't know how to settle between presence and absence. The town didn't forget. Within an hour, news of the girl spread from the milliner's to the chapel steps. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Burney, saw to it that a group of concerned ladies gathered near the dry goods store, speaking of morality and mercy in the same breath. "It sets a dangerous precedent," she said. "Girls carried in like livestock and given a place without penance." Martha Crane overheard this as she picked up flour and beans. "Better to give a girl a place than leave her in a ditch," she muttered. Meanwhile, Mercy kept to the room. She read the same Bible verse 4 times without understanding a word. Then she unpacked her shawl, folded it tight, and stared out the window at the clouds stacking low over the hills. Her baby kicked once, then again. Each time steadier. Each time like a question, what now? Late that evening, James returned with fresh bread and a comb carved from driftwood. He handed it to her without comment. She turned it over in her hand, the wood worn smooth at the handle. "You think I need fixing?" she asked. "No," James said. "Just figure you've gone long without something gentle." Mercy looked at him then, not as a stranger but not yet as a man she knew. Something in her gaze shifted. Something almost soft. "I used to have one like this," she murmured. "He didn't ask what happened to it. He just said, 'I can patch the roof tomorrow. This place needs some dry corners.'" That night, she combed her hair by lamplight, each stroke steady, untangling not just strands but thoughts. She didn't cry. But she didn't feel numb anymore either. There was something between the two. Something like remembering how to live. In the following days, Mercy began to walk through town. Not far. Just enough to show she wasn't hiding. At the well, she drew water. At the store, she picked beans with careful hands. At the post, she sat beneath the shade with her shawl folded neatly in her lap. Her silence unsettled the gossips more than any tantrum might have. At the same time, James worked his fields. His return to town was quieter than hers, less discussed but just as noticed. A man who'd once spent days talking only to his soil now came into the blacksmith's and said, "I'll need hinges for the girl's door." Not, "The girl I bought." Not, "The girl I saved." Just the girl. It was Martha who spoke first. One night after supper, she stopped Mercy on the porch. "You know they'll keep talking," she said. "I reckon," Mercy replied. "Why not fight back? Talk don't wound me. Then what does?" Mercy looked at the sky, where stars blinked like things that knew better than to speak. "Being nothing," she said. "Being passed over so much I stopped expecting anyone to reach." Martha didn't reply. But the next morning, she left a tin of honey biscuits outside Mercy's door with no note. In time, the sharpest gossips dulled. Mercy's steadiness wore them down like river over rock. And James's presence beside her at the chapel gate one Sunday morning sealed something unspoken. He didn't sit next to her inside. Didn't touch her arm. But he held the door open and tipped his hat. And for that whole service, not a soul looked her way without first glancing at him. After church, the preacher's wife approached Mercy and offered her a bundle of baby clothes. Her lips were thin, and her smile tighter than a corset string, but the gesture was real. "Thank you," Mercy said, tone even. "You'll be watched, Miss Talbot. People want to see what you become. Then I'll make sure it's worth watching." She turned and walked toward James, who waited near the wagon, arms crossed, face unreadable. "That was bold," he murmured. Being quiet didn't help before. James looked at her then, like maybe he saw something that hadn't been there when they left Hollow Creek the first time. Not a girl. Not a burden. Not a symbol. But a woman. Choosing not to be disappeared. That evening, in the cabin room, Mercy sat by the window with the baby clothes folded beside her. She placed the comb on the sill. And as the dusk settled like a hymn around her shoulders, she whispered a prayer not for safety, not for justice, but for time. Time to grow. Time to be known. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote howled again, not like a warning but like a song sung to those who stayed. James, sitting on the porch, listened. He didn't smile. But something near his ribs shifted, warm and aching. He had come to Hollow Creek to be left alone. And now, without meaning to, he'd given that up. Not for love. Not yet. But for something quieter. For the sound of a woman reclaiming her space. And the whisper of a town slowly forgetting how to hate. The wind turned warmer that week, thick with the scent of juniper and dry wheat, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Mercy had taken to sitting on the porch just after sunrise, both hands resting atop her belly, eyes scanning the pale fields that curled toward the horizon like pages yet to be written. The baby kicked stronger now, often enough to wake her in the night. Each time it did, James heard her shift in the next room but never asked. And Mercy never said. They'd grown into a rhythm, soft and wordless. He chopped wood. She folded linens. He brought back nails for the warped window frame. She cooked stew from dried beans and root vegetables, always with enough for two. They rarely spoke of the past, and they never said what would come next. But some silences, like seeds, mean something is growing. It was on a Tuesday that the peace cracked. The sheriff's boots hit the porch boards with an echo too heavy for mourning. James met him at the door, eyes shaded beneath the brim of his hat. "Jude," he said low. Sheriff Jude Mallory was a tall man with a stiff jaw and a kindness that came second to the rules. "Boone," he replied. "Need a word." Mercy stepped out behind James, her shoulders bracing before her thoughts could catch up. She didn't speak, just watched. The sheriff glanced at her, then cleared his throat. "He's back." James didn't ask who. He knew. "Where?" he asked. "Town. Claims you took what was his." Mercy's fingers gripped the door frame like it might hold her upright. "I'll come in after chores," James said. The sheriff nodded. "Wouldn't wait too long. Man like that don't drink his patience." He left with the same weight he'd brought. Mercy turned toward James. "He can't take me back." "No," James said. "But he'll try." They didn't eat that day. James stayed outside, hammering a gate hinge that didn't need fixing. Mercy stayed inside, staring at her packed bag beneath the cot, the one she never unpacked fully, just in case. By late afternoon, the shadows stretched long, and Mercy watched him from the porch. He wasn't a large man, but he looked immovable then, like the land, like something no longer willing to be moved for anyone. "He's not here for me," she said. James didn't turn. "Then what do you think he's here for?" "To shame me. To undo what peace I have left." James wiped his hands and looked her full in the face. "You think I'd let that happen?" "I think people let things happen all the time," she said. He didn't argue. Just nodded once, then walked back toward the barn to hitch the mare. In town, the sky dulled to a flat gray, thick with the feel of coming rain. James left Mercy with Martha Crane, who didn't ask questions, just opened her door wide and laid a quilt over the parlor sofa with a mutter of, "You're safe here, girl." "That's not a kindness. That's a fact." James found Gideon Talbot outside the saloon, leaning against the post like a man too tired to hate but too proud to leave without a fight. His beard was darker now, streaked with dust and sweat, and he held a flask like a weapon he hadn't thrown yet. "You made good on a deal," Gideon said, no greeting. "But the girl wasn't yours to keep. She wasn't yours to sell. That ain't what the law says." James said nothing. "You can't fix her, Boone. Some women are cracked right through." "I didn't buy her to fix her," James said. "I gave what you were too low to give, a way out. Then give her back." James took a breath so deep the wind paused with him. "You don't scare me, Talbot," he said. "But you ought to fear yourself. You keep cutting pieces from your life, you'll die with nothing left but debt and splinters." The sheriff had come up behind them. Quiet. Watching. "You want to make this legal?" Mallory asked. "No," James said. "He wants to be loud enough someone mistakes him for right." Talbot stepped forward. "You gonna let him steal from me?" he asked the sheriff. "She ain't a mule," Jude replied. "She's a person. She chose to stay. She's carrying sin. She's carrying a child," James snapped, voice low, firm. "And what kind of man are you to leave both out in the wind for someone else to carry?" Talbot scoffed, took a swig and tossed the flask at James's boots. "You'll regret her," he said. "Mark me." James didn't flinch. "I've regretted plenty," he said. "But not choosing kindness. Not once." Talbot spat at the dirt, then walked off. Not fast. Not far. But far enough. The sheriff clapped James once on the shoulder. Town heard that. James only replied, "Good." That night, thunder rolled over the valley like a drum calling something ancient awake. Mercy stood at the window in Martha's front room, watching the clouds churn black above the hills. She hadn't touched the dinner Martha left on the tray. Her thoughts were somewhere deeper than hunger could reach. When James came through the door, soaked to the elbows, she looked at him without speaking. "It's done," he said. Mercy walked to him, slow, measured. "Did you raise a hand?" she asked. "No." "Did you wish to?" "Yes." She reached for his coat, peeled it from his shoulders, and laid it across the fire rack without thinking. Then she turned to him, wet shirt clinging to his chest, eyes tired but steady. "You don't talk like other men," she whispered. I don't feel like other men. You're not afraid of what they say about me? I'm afraid of what you think when you hear it. Mercy's lip trembled. Her hands pressed over her belly like a shield she couldn't drop. I want to believe I'm more than what he left behind. You already are. The room quieted as if the house itself were listening. In the corner the fire cracked once, sharp and sudden. And Mercy stepped forward. Not to kiss, not to cling, but to place one hand flat against James's chest. To feel the steadiness beneath all that restraint. And when he lifted his hand to cover hers, it wasn't passion that passed between them. It was certainty. And the promise of a storm weathered together. The storm broke just after midnight, a hard wind slapping at the shutters of Martha Crane's parlor as if the sky itself had unfinished business. Mercy Talbot sat upright on the settee, breath held, hands trembling. The baby kicked again, hard this time, a pulse of panic below her ribs. Outside, the lightning split the sky like a crack in a porcelain plate, and thunder rolled deep enough to stir the dead. James Boone had fallen asleep by the fire, boots still on, coat drying on the hearth. He stirred the moment she gasped. It's starting, Mercy whispered. Too early. He was on his feet before she could finish the sentence, kneeling before her, one hand reaching for hers, the other steadying her back. His face, so often a mask of quiet, broke open then, lines deepening not with fear but with resolve. Can you walk? I don't know. You won't have to alone. They didn't wake Martha. James lifted Mercy carefully, carried her out into the storm with one hand over her belly and one pressed firm to her back. Rain soaked them in seconds, but the cabin wasn't far, not anymore. The wind howled, thunder chased their every step, but James moved with purpose, boots heavy in the mud, every motion a vow. Inside the cabin, it smelled of cedar and iron. The stove was cold, but the walls still held warmth from the last fire. James laid her on the bed as gently as he'd once handled glass, and then moved like a man who'd prepared for this day in his mind 100 times and prayed it wouldn't come too soon. Water boiled. Cloths were laid out. A lantern lit and set low, its glow like a whisper across Mercy's face. The pain came sharp. Her hands gripped the edge of the mattress. She bit down not to scream. I can't do this, she panted. Yes you can, James said, voice low. You already are. And then she did. 4 hours, storm above, sweat below, she bore down into the pain with eyes clenched, knuckles white, breath ragged. James never left. He held her when she asked. He let her break his wrist bones with her grip. And when she nearly fainted, he cupped her face and said, You're not alone. Not anymore. And that, more than the heat, more than the pain, was what carried her through. At dawn, with rain tapering to a hush, the baby came. A girl. Red-faced and howling, slippery with life and fierce with need. James wrapped her in a faded quilt Mercy had stitched in the long afternoons. And when he placed the child in Mercy's arms, something inside her cracked, but not like breaking. Like a dam giving way to something overdue. She cried then. Not from pain. From relief. From disbelief. I thought I'd have to do this with no one, she whispered. You don't, James said. Not now. Not again. Outside the world had washed clean. Trees dripped. The road to Hollow Creek shone wet with morning light. The sky, streaked with pink and silver, looked like forgiveness. Mercy named the child Hope. And when Martha arrived with broth and blankets, she didn't comment on the tears. She just wiped Mercy's forehead and said, She's yours now. And no one's taking her. By noon the town had heard. Some shook their heads. Some sent pie. Most said nothing but quietly moved their judgment aside. And James? He stood on the porch that evening with the child in his arms and Mercy in the doorway, tired but upright, hair undone, face soft with exhaustion and something like joy. When the preacher passed by, he tipped his hat. And James, holding Hope close, said, She's not mine by blood. But, the preacher asked. But she's mine by choice. Mercy stepped forward then, placed a hand on James's shoulder, and the three of them stood like a thing settled. Not perfect, but whole. Later that week, Mercy placed the comb on the windowsill beside a dried sunflower from the ridge. She swept the floor slowly, humming under her breath. James watched her from the doorway, how her hand curved protectively over the baby asleep in the sling, how her feet knew this floor like she belonged. You still think you were bought? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No. I think I was claimed by someone who saw past shame. Then you'll stay? I already have. Outside the hills were green again. The land, once brittle and cracked, had softened. The barn stood repaired. The well full. And the cabin? The cabin stood, Not because of nails or stone, but because two people, once unwanted, had built something from nothing. Together. Let this be the story remembered. That a man with grief in his marrow chose kindness over silence. That a girl with no name left was seen and stayed. And that in a world full of auctions and abandonments, there are still men who walk away from the trade, and toward the fire. The kind of fire that warms. The kind that stays lit through storms. And to you, listening now, wherever your burden, however your past, remember this. You are not the price someone put on you. You are not the hands that let go. You are the place you choose to stand. And sometimes the cabin is not just shelter. It's the promise that you're no longer alone,